Welcome, everyone. You're in the right place for Getting Value from BIM with your presenter, Joe Eichenseer. Joe, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As was mentioned, we've got a session here, some time to be able to talk about what do we have, what's not just what is the value of BIM, but what's real, how do we extract it out, what are the different types of things that are out there, what's reality. So it will be some good, maybe refresher for some, and positive, hopefully, information for everybody that's involved with this. As Jenna mentioned, my name is Joe Eichenseer. I'm the director of IMAGINIT's Building Lifecycle Solutions team. So I work with all of our trainers, consultants, everybody from a technical side that does anything related to buildings, whether it's design, construction, facilities management, you name it. That's where we're at. I've been with the company for going on 19 years now, and just loving every minute, just getting to be able to work with people like you every day, and just it's a great time. So that being said, enough about me and the more important part of why we are here. And why we're here is, well, this whole idea of value out of BIM. If we think about things from a big picture, if we go back, gosh, it's close to 10 plus years, depending on how you're measuring things, this whole transition to BIM, you may be just new into it. You may have been going through this whole BIM world for years and years and years, and it's all old hat. But there's, at some point in time, whenever we're doing something, anything in a business world, we really need to be basing any of the decisions of what we do off of what value are we getting out of it. Sometimes it might be a direct monetary value. Sometimes it might be building business relationships value. It might be something that just makes the community better. That's a value that comes out of this as well. But we need to look at that and say, what are we getting out of all these things? What's the value that we can get out of BIM today? So we'll take a look at that, and we'll be evaluating some of those things of what is reality of what people are getting out of BIM today. What do you need to be able to do all these different things? And where's the data moving in all these different places? You've heard it probably time and time again that the value of BIM is most often called the eye of BIM, the information side of it. Well, okay, if that's so valuable, what do we do with it? How do we pass it along from one place to another, or does it just sit in one repository for the entire life cycle? How do we handle all these things? And as we're taking a look at that, what's the difference in perception that we've got in this value of BIM depending on what role you're playing inside the whole building, design, construction, facilities management, whatever place you have in the world of buildings, everybody's got a different perspective on it. And so which of all these things that are out here apply to you, apply to the people that you work with, and understanding how that's all coming along. If you think then about what this concept is of what we're here to be talking about, it really is an aspect where we're coming back to basics. Going back to the core of why you're doing business, why you're using a particular piece of software. And as we're thinking back on these elements, is there really a chance to change how you're thinking of them? The second picture there, same old thinking gives you the same old results, which leads to the same old thinking, and so on and so on. Like let's say an annual review, we theoretically, everybody has some sort of an annual performance review with you in your office and colleagues or bosses or whomever. You have this annual checkup and say, how are we doing, what's going on? Or maybe you think about it of the New Year comes around and you get a New Year's resolution. You're thinking about, how can I change something to make it better? In the sense of what we're doing here, we're looking to just revisit those fundamental concepts of why did you go to BIM to begin with, or why are you going to BIM? What's the reason you jumped into Revit? Are you doing everything you could or should? Keeping in mind, though, that what is basic for you might not be basic for somebody else, might not even be in somebody else's playing field. There's all sorts of things that could happen. Do they all matter to everybody? No, absolutely not. But let's grab those things and make sure that as we're enhancing our use of Revit, as we're moving into that world of BIM, that we're strategically getting all that we can out of it, getting some good results back from this, and improving your business, improving your bottom line, improving the community around you, however you choose to measure that value. When I look at, or if you were to go out and do a search for whatever favorite search engine you have and say, well, benefits of BIM or value in BIM, or in my case, if I was going through different presentations that we've given as IMAGINiT over the last decade, some of the most common elements that we've got out there of the value of BIM, why go to BIM, why make these changes? If we've got a solid 2D drafting practice that keeps our business profitable, why go through this monumental change into this other world of BIM? And these are the types of things that you'll have through there. Some of them are named in different ways. So like reduced emissions and errors can be also rephrased as reduced rework. Marketing new business can be rephrased as offering new services. A little bit in there on the second column, getting more done in less time can be kind of sort of like the bottom of the first column of reduced project duration. So there's some overlap between all of these different items, but chances are somewhere, somehow, sometime, as you were going through this world of BIM and how it was going to just save the world and make good all that is holy, these were some of the things that were the promise of why we're making this change. Some of the most common ones certainly are the idea of productivity. We can do more with less is a big piece of that BIM world. And in this case, we're not talking about specifically BIM as a piece of software, not BIM as Revit per se, but we're talking about BIM as this different way of approaching projects. The overall idea of it's not just one piece of software that I use to build, evaluate, simulate a building. It's a collection of software or a different way that you might go about doing things that is the BIM workflow. And if you look at that, I guess the first question I would have in your head, you don't need to type it into the Q&A panel, but in your head, how many of these are things that you've achieved? You think you are better today than you were before, and maybe to some extent, a change in philosophy of going from a 2D CAD to a BIM-based workflow has something to do with that change. As we're looking at this list, we'll talk about some of these others that are coming along, but how many of these are things that, I thought we were going to go to that, and we never saw that benefit, or we never strove to achieve that benefit? Because this list, it's not complete everything. It's probably a top 15, 20 list, but for each and every person out there, there's a separation between perception of what should BIM be doing for me and the reality of what it is doing for you. And sometimes that difference between perception and reality is, everything in that previous list is possible, but they don't all matter to everybody. It's case in point, if I go back for a second here, just personal Joe Eichenseer moment here. My background is from the architecture side of life, did schools, healthcare centers, fun stuff like that. Never, ever, ever would I get to a spot where if I look at the bottom of the first column, reduced project duration, if I'm working on a project and you tell me, hey, Joe, you can move from AutoCAD to Revit and you'll get this, you'll be doing more in less time, and instead of a project taking you 6 months to finish, you can finish it in 5. Guess what? I'm going to take 6 months anyway, because I'll take that extra month of time you just gave me and do things in the project to make it better. Better coordination, better documentation, better design, better whatever. I'm going to be doing something that extra little bit of time in there, so it's not really going to change my project duration. I might be getting more done in less amount of time, but I'm going to take the time that I saved and continue to do more. So that'd be a Joe thing. Maybe that's a fault of mine. Just take that into consideration too. But not everything in this list is something that I'm going to experience. A contractor might totally see project duration. I could have the building built in a month less. I'm on it. It just depends on where you are, where you're coming from, and so we can separate that perception of what what's the vision of what BIM was supposed to be versus what it really, really is for me in my situation, in the discipline that I'm in. If I'm a structural engineer, mechanical engineer, architect, contractor, facility manager, who knows, any of those and more. The biggest thing that we'll often see amongst all those, we have the productivity piece that fits in, but there's also the idea of better communication. And I will absolutely argue that better communication is a functional reality in BIM if you're really going through this overall BIM process. Because I don't know about you, but I believe in my heart of hearts that all of us, if you've been in the industry for more than 2 years, have probably run into one or multiple people with all sorts of different titles behind their name that could not read either of these little floor plan clips. And to some extent, it's going to be really difficult to read anyway because, you know, the M9205, you know, rectangle in the top right corner, is it a table? It says an exam room, so it's probably some sort of an exam table. But could it be a desk? Could it be something? It's just a rectangle with a number on it. And those will be hard to read, you know, any one of those pieces through there. Unless you're intimately familiar with what's going on in the building, those are difficult to read, even if you are a seasoned professional that has no problem reading floor plans. A lot of people have problems reading floor plans, and that whole idea of BIM gets us to a spot where we will get different levels of graphic representation that really help out with displaying and understanding what the building really and truly looks like, whether we're in just some sort of a perspective top-down view or rendering from something inside the scene. Suddenly, it doesn't matter if we've got all the colors right or if it's photo real or this or that or the other, but suddenly seeing some of those shapes in a 3D world is a reality of better communication. Now the question then becomes, what are we communicating? Is what we're communicating just the design of, in this case, an exam room, an operatory, a treatment room, a whatever, an apartment? Any one of those different things, what are we trying to communicate? Is this just the layout and the feel of the space? Are we trying to communicate the impact of a redesign or a remodel? Are we trying to go through and the list goes on and on and on of what are we trying to communicate, and the ability to take one thing in, we'll say Revit for right now, and represent it in a myriad of different ways. A wall in a floor plan view, a wall in a 3D view, a wall in a schedule, a wall in some sort of a phasing diagram. Any of those things can mean different things to different people. Is it a load-bearing wall? Somebody in structure is going to be really, well, actually all of us should be really cognizant of that as we're going through it all, but it means different things to different people, and we've got to communicate. But all of this, no matter what we're looking at, has to come down to saying if we're going to communicate better and we're going to use this tool to communicate better, we have to turn around and make sure we're starting with good data. Because if that M9025 exam table, if I don't have some sort of it doesn't have to be as accurate as, you know, that patient bed, patient table in the 3D rendering picture down below, but it has to be some level of representation so that when you get into a 3D view, it's not just a box. It's got to be something, maybe not the exact one, that'll get value engineered out, right? But it's got to be something in there. The data behind it of, you know, do we care about cost? Do we care about manufacturer's information? Maybe not now, but later on, do we care about that? When speaking of the wall, do we care about, is this a load-bearing or a non-load-bearing wall? We have to have good data so that as we're communicating, we're sending all that information to different places and it makes sense. So, yes, the reality is BIM is a platform in which you should be communicating better, maybe even communicating more often. But if you're not communicating better, there's some things that we'll have to look at. First off, is that one of your goals of BIM? Maybe it's not. We have to take that into a possible reality. But if it is, are you doing with good data? Do you have good communication workflows? There's things like that that'll come through there, but we have to have that starting point. One of the realities is that, well, it's not always as easy as a click, click, click. So we could call that a reality. We can also turn around and call that a perception. You know, perception being, as many times we've probably heard at different places, it's super easy. Just click here and isn't it done? This is just a little quick screen cap of 3D Studio Max Material Editor, and I selected just a wood flooring. It's actually a little bit highlighted towards the bottom of the first column, American Cherry. And this is just how that default material looks like. And all of a sudden, what was, oh, it's just a simple wood floor, there's a lot of possibilities and options within just a material assignment, let alone any rendering, scene settings, or animations or whatever. I mean, I can't tell you how many different times as IMAGINiT we've been approached by various people who say, hey, I'm in Revit and I want to create some graphics like I'm seeing on HGTV show X. Doesn't matter which one of them you're looking at. We're doing a home renovation and I want things to fly in and fade away and camera pans and all these things. And it's not really as easy as it might seem at first blush. We had this issue when we were moving to the CAD world. We have it when we're going into the BIM world. It's not always easy. But if you take the time to do it right, it can be good and it can be quality. There's that perception that we've got to be able to fight through all the time, but we've got to make sure that it's there. You know, this particular piece was looking at rendering settings for 3D Studio Max. It could just as easily be, well, heck, if we look at this, the reality of better coordination. Something like this piping layout. Oh, yeah, it's Revit. Drawing pipe is easy. Well, kinda. I mean, to some extent, it's not necessarily hard, but it takes time to get it right. And we have to take that time. If we're talking about something from structural engineering, oh, it's easy. You just click a button, and it sends all the information from Revit to your structural analysis program of choice. And then you click a button there, and it analyzes everything. And then you click another button, and it sends it all back to Revit and updates the model for you. Isn't it that easy? Not necessarily. It can be time-consuming and not difficult. Sometimes can be difficult and time-consuming. But if we want it to be right, let's take the time to do it right. Because that does give us to a reality of BIM does provide better coordination. You know, that is, I think, one of those other very common things that people are looking for in the reality of their world, is saying, yeah, I'm going to model this as I need it to be, and so that when people come through and install and do whatever, it will match up, and we'll have a well-coordinated model where everything goes and shows what it needs to be, does what it's got to do. It takes some time, but we do have that ability, and that is a reality. BIM is a better coordinated building than 2D CAD or whatever you might have been using previously. But the key for that, if you're going to be using Revit for that aspect of coordination and where we're sending things, is that you do have to model accurately. If you're not modeling accurately, there's no sense in trying to run a clash coordination between something where you're not getting the slope of a pipe correct. Is it ½ inch per foot? Is it ¼ inch per foot? That'll make just a wee bit of a difference over a long run of what we're doing from clash coordination. We've got to model accurately. Does that mean that we're going through and doing a laser scan and modeling within the nearest millimeter to everything that's out there? No, we don't have to go to that level if that's not what you need, but we need to be accurate to whatever level of tolerance is appropriate for your system. Now, that flip side for that particular thing, reality is better coordination, but does it matter for you? Because while all of these things are possible, we can get architecture, structure, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, piping, all the different trades and people to get everything super duper accurate for you and for your building. But there's another reality behind this, that not all jobs, not all buildings get the same benefit from clash coordination. If I'm doing this type of building, just a big warehouse, I don't really care much about clash coordination. I would probably like to see all the structure modeled in 3D so we can make sure that, roof slopes and overall clearances are correct for head heights or something along those lines. But if sprinkler systems, conduit, junction boxes, there's so much available space in a building like this, it really just doesn't matter. So going back to that initial list, when you're looking at the reality of all the things that can be done, let's make sure that you're matching it up with the reality of what matters to you, not just for you as the overall company, Joe as Joe Eichenseer Enterprises, whatever I am, but for each different building on its own merit. If I do some multifamily mixed-use residential, and I do some schools, and I do some healthcare, you can bet that the healthcare side is going to have the most need, likely, for coordination, clash detection, things like that, than I would on either of the other two business units that I work in. So we need to take each building and know what matters, and know what matters for each individual within this. So if I'm putting on my architect hat and I'm saying, hey, my plumbing piping engineers, I need you to model all of your elements to the nearest half inch. I need to try to step back and take a dose of reality. How much does this really matter? And let's understand the direction that other people are coming from, their perspective as well, so that as we're making requirements or demands or anything else along those lines, it's with not just my benefit, but the overall team, the overall project reality in mind. Another type of reality out there, if we're looking at things, is the overall concept of building performance analysis. There's this whole idea of CFD, computational fluid dynamics. It's really detailed calculation, among other things, of airflow inside a building, fluids across different surfaces. And in this case, air acts like a fluid. This is actually taken from a project that we worked on with a client of ours, in that we're trying to figure out how do we ease off and get rid of some of these hot spots and the cool spots. Really important for things if we're working like a data center is a place where we actually did do a safety analysis for a client that was working in a warehouse, and they wanted to try and figure out how can we get rid of these really cold areas that happen right next to the big garage doors. You go to the back of the room, you're sweating. You go to the front of your room, you're frigid. How do we even out temperatures for the comfort and energy efficiency of the building and the comfort of the staff that are working in there? You can see without the text through here, the whole idea is that we can take those specific situations where it matters and do some of this analysis. But we've got to have BIM as the core of what's happening in here. My argument in this case is that the whole process of modeling up a space, that's not BIM in and of itself. Taking that and rolling it into analysis software, which is not Revit, for going through these different simulations, is where we can go through and say, yeah, BIM saves us money. We're going through the different components of what are we analyzing inside this building, and now that we know what we're analyzing, we can figure it out without the exorbitant expense of constructing a full-scale model of the space, or maybe not full scale, but it could be partial scale and you try to work with little fans. But whatever it's got to be, let's make sure there's that real business value coming out of this. So the reality is we can go through better building performance analysis in a BIM workflow. I'd argue that you can't really do it effectively in a 2D CAD workflow to save money, to make the working environment for people that will be inhabiting that space better. If you want to really go big and like proud moments and things like that, you can actually take it a little bit further. Again, you're going into a little bit more of a smaller niche of, this isn't, like right here with building performance analysis, we're mostly caring about the building owner, their energy costs. It's a primary concern, I would argue, of more of the mechanical, maybe electrical engineers. Architecture, a close second. Structure, the temperature in the room doesn't really control whether or not it's going to stand up or fall down in this sense. So each different group in here cares different amounts. The construction side will care based off of what equipment, what intake, outtake for air we could put, all sorts of things that matter to different trades. But if we narrow that focus a little bit more, we can go into and say, well, in infection control, the whole concept of BIM, BIM being the definition of we take a building, we develop it virtually so it can be analyzed and simulated in that virtual world before we ever get to the physical world, or we can model out existing conditions and simulate those conditions to determine what is an optimized retrofit. In this case is the word we use, design, some sort of remodel. In the case of what we have here, each one of these little tubes, you may have seen these types of images before, but each one of these different tubes is the flow of air inside a particular room. And the existing conditions on the left-hand side is air is going everywhere. The big picture for this, if you say there's value in BIM and you want to really just kind of get some attention from somebody somewhere, the big value in here is BIM saves lives. If we can go from the environment on the left, let me clear that out so you can see it better again, where we've got particles of whatever floating anywhere inside, and there's a body and operating table in the middle of the room, and we can move it to what it's like on the right-hand side where all the air is moving away from the body, which might be, opened up for a reconstructive knee surgery, open heart surgery, who knows what might be going on. We can keep those infectious particles away from the body that's in an operating room. And there's something along the lines of 10,000 deaths per year based off of infections that are contracted in a hospital. Doing it right, BIM saves lives. Now, is this going to matter to most people? No, it'll matter to the doctors, the owners of the hospital, the people that are running those facilities, because again, life and human safety is important. It'll matter to the various trades that are going through here. Again, from, we'll say in this case, structure, will it matter as much? Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe some of the reconfiguration of the room involves moving structural elements around so that we can get the right intake and outtake vents for a room, fans, or whatever might happen to be the case. But this matters. Similar to looking back at the concept of clash detection, not every building gets a whole lot of benefit from clash detection. You're doing, again, big box stores, light commercial, single family residential. There's probably not a whole lot of value that you get from clash detection, depending on where you are, what industry you're serving, things like that. But same thing applies here. Not every building really gets benefit from infection control through CFD analysis, or not every building has the same need for heating and cooling of a particular room like we do in a data center or open warehouses and things like that. But every building has some level of need or potential need for insight into how it's going to perform. So we may not be going the whole level of CFD analysis, but there's places, this is a screen cap from some things that we can get from the Autodesk Software Insight. But we can get some insight into the building of how it's going to perform, whether it's commercial, residential, institutional, you name it. Just get an idea of what can we do to reduce our carbon footprint, make a better building for our client, make a better building for the world if you want to expand and cast your vision as big as all of that is. With BIM, though, the concept that's at its core is let's go through and identify early and often what can we do to make the building better. I would argue that there's been an influx of clients coming back and chatting with us that have made their move to Revit, made the move to BIM, and have been there for a while and are pretty good at it, but are now scratching their heads and saying, well, what now? What next? What can I do to continue improving? We made goals. We achieved those goals. What's next? And this can be one of those things. Are you going through and just at least doing some conceptual analysis of what's happening inside your building? Heating and cooling, conceptual analysis of what happens if you were to change one type of roof insulation to a different type of roof insulation? Does it really make an appreciable impact on the overall cost of the building? What's the possible photovoltaic gain that you can get if you put a bunch of panels on top of the roofs? What's possible? What can we do potentially to make things better than they were before, to drive down costs, to drive up efficiencies, and things. We just need to work through that and figure it out. Now, another reality that we've got, and this is, again, pulling from actual IMAGINiT clients that have done these types of things. We have clients that have gone through and set up methods and workflows by which we can take information from, we'll say, a design BIM environment. We'll Revit. It could go into any number of different pieces of software. It's not just Revit is only BIM. It could be Plant 3D, could be Advanced Steel, all sorts of different, fabrication, MEP, whatever is that particular software of choice, no matter who you are, to be able to take that and provide the initial designed environment and get that over for a manufacturer. In this case, there were some places where there were key structural, loading points that different equipment or things can hang on to. Maybe we're talking about speakers, maybe we're talking about signage, any number of different types of things of here is where you can hang your stuff, Mr. and Mrs. Manufacturer, to put your components into the building. But we can take that initial design, further develop the model based off of what the manufacturer's content is, and then send that over to the manufacturer, and they can start customizing their building components to your actual facility, whatever it might happen to be. Then send that information back, and all of a sudden, we've got this round trip of data in which we'll say the architectural design is responding to the equipment that is being placed in it. And then conversely, that equipment is responding to the architectural design. If we change something in design so that the mounting locations moved for stadium signage, for equipment that's hanging off of the long spans of a conference hall, any number of those different types of things, we can maintain those connection points and have, we'll say, this signage change its size and shape and configuration to make sure it fits within its allowable area, it's within particular design constraints so it doesn't get too large, and then passes information back to the manufacturer who can go ahead and build that custom piece of content based off of how their model was interacting with the building design model, the engineering model that's going into this. That's a cool thing that can happen with everybody, and that's a reality of what is happening today. Is it going to fit for everybody that's out there? No. But for those places where you are working on something where it does need to interact with other equipment, you're creating the shell and somebody else is putting other things into the shell, whether it's another design or engineering firm or it's an external manufacturer, there's this concept that we need to maintain those key both geometric and data connection points as we're pulling these things through. Now, we got to stop here, and how does that happen? If we're talking about taking something that is, again, we'll say Revit as the architecture and engineering design, and then from that architecture and engineering design, we're going to a manufacturer. Chances are that manufacturer is not using your traditional building BIM software. They're not using Revit. They're using Inventor. They're using AutoCAD Mechanical. They're using something, but it's not Revit. How do we get data from point number 1 to point number 2 so we can work on it and send it back? Similar type of thing happens if we're looking at structural analysis of how do we get data from Revit and the structural elements that are there to an analysis software, robot or otherwise, and now analyze it and then send the information back. And the only way that happens is through standards, right? Everybody's got some level of standards, but we're extending this from the basics of data standards of the walls will, in plan view, will have a line weight of 5 and an elevation a line weight of 4. Okay, yeah, there's the standard. But when we're turning around and talking about how are different pieces of data crossing between various platforms, and we get it so that the connected data from one system to another reliably, consistently sending it back and forth and everything just works, repeated time and time and time again, it's really getting deeper from what we've conceived of as more traditional, Revit BIM standards to things that are going into data standards. This is an example of, I've got data that's coming from a whole bunch of different places so that I can assemble, a room ID number or a unique ID number for a room, and we're pulling stuff from here to there to this to that. If this type of thing is something that can happen reliably every single time, and we're talking about an item code that exists for a thing in a building. It's based off of what level is it in. It's fixed. It's not going to be moved around in the building, so we can tie it to a level, a room, its number, the type of item it is, and all these things, and that's a consistent piece, then congratulations, we've got a data standard. And if everybody sticks to it, all of a sudden, I now have an environment where I can exchange data. Because it doesn't matter if I'm using the unique ID number of LI22135, or if I'm saying, hey, this is a light in room 213 and it's light number 5. It doesn't matter how I talk about it and in which place and how I bring it through. It's now something that can go bidirectional because there's an established data path for all these things. This gets into the bigger picture of BIM. When we pull information from structure to a structural analysis software and then back into Revit, it's done because there's an established standard of what data corresponds to what fields of information in each different piece of software. When, as IMAGINiT, we're connecting a Revit information database to a procurement database for pieces and parts of things that need to get assembled for the building, we can establish what is that rule by which Revit feeds the procurement database and the procurement database feeds Revit. It's just data standards. How do we integrate them? If we've got those standards, we know what is important, and we'll get into some of that of how do we establish and what do we need to know. But if we've got the standards, we know what's important, and we can trade information back and forth. There may be out-of-box ways that we can start sharing that information. There may be, customized things that a different software vendor or IMAGINiT can help you with. But if we've got those things, then we get to perhaps what is one of the more challenging pieces of really getting to that next level of how well are we using BIM, how can we improve and get things better than where we are today. Probably the biggest challenge that we've got through here then becomes sharing. Like I've said so many different times through here, there have been any number of different situations where myself or others on my team have gone in and had a meeting with a client. And it doesn't matter who that client is, it's happened at all levels everywhere. But we're having a meeting with a client somewhere and they say, you know what, we're ready for that next level of BIM, we need to go do things better, we want to share information in different ways, we want to work through it all and it's all great, except we don't trust our partners. So while we know we need to share, and there's all sorts of ways this conversation comes out, but while we know we need to share to get better and to improve on our overall efficiency and workflow and whatever buzzword you want to throw into there, if you don't trust the people that you're working with to do what they're supposed to do and they don't trust you to do what you're supposed to do, we're in a world of hurt. Now, it's not to say that you can't verify what somebody has sent to you. Trust but verify is a perfectly acceptable and probably recommended way to go about business. But if you don't trust, share, and verify, then we're not going to be able to get to that next step. Your integration with BIM as a firm, as a company, as an individual is going to hit some barriers. And you won't be able to get past those barriers until we can get to that next level of how are we sharing? What are we sharing? How many different ways let's take a look at the classic example of a toilet. Who's responsible for placing the toilet? Maybe the architect does it originally, but after the architect has placed it, who controls and manages that? Reflected ceilings plans, whether it's the grid or anything else, the light fixtures. Is there only one toilet inside your collective building model, or is there the architectural toilet and then the plumbing engineer dropped in their version of the toilet and so you've got 2 sitting there. Same thing for perhaps light fixtures. For structural members, same type of thing. Is there multiple iterations of a single thing, or is there just one? Because suddenly we've got double counting, if that's the case when we're doing quantity analysis. So we can't really do quantity takeoffs with the model. That's not a value we can get out of BIM, be it that you're the architect trying to get a quantity takeoff to understand what's the overall cost estimate, or if you're the general contractor doing the same, if you're the engineer just getting the how many X's do I have inside this building, does that match up with our initial estimates? All of those things come through, and suddenly we can't trust the model for what we wanted anymore. We've got to be able to move to that spot where we can share. Maybe there's one toilet that's placed by the architect, and then the plumbing engineer places connectors onto the toilet and starts routing pipe from there. You know, maybe that's a solution that can help get to that next level so that we're sharing information, we're trusting each other, but we're verifying what's there to make sure that something didn't change in the background that I've got to be worried about. Because the big picture of the types of things that we're moving to is similar to the idea that's proposed by Autodesk Project Quantum. If you haven't seen that, search it up. Information about it's been around for a couple of years. It's as of right now, I won't say it's completely vaporware per se, but the concept of what Autodesk wants to do with this is set up. And it's the idea that you can have a single object that's shared by everybody in the project team, and it's just one of it. And depending on who you are, it's going to be representing itself in a different way. So if we're looking at, I mentioned a wall before. Is this a wall? Is it a load-bearing wall? How does it need to be seen by a structural engineer versus the architect versus the HVAC engineer that needs to cut a hole in it so he can bring some duct on through? If it's even possible to do that. If we're looking at a piece of framing inside a curtain wall system, that one piece of framing is going to look different to somebody who just needs to see the overall design versus somebody that needs to go through and say, is this something that needs to be analyzed for structural integrity? How are we going to construct it? How are we going to fabricate it? The concept through here is let's have one object that everybody shares, but you control just the part that you're supposed to control. Maybe it'll be by software permissions to let you just touch the things you are allowed to touch. Maybe there's just trust between companies, individuals. There's probably a whole spectrum of things that will end up being possible through here, but this is that idea, that future vision of where things are going is we need to work better together to get these values out of them so that I'm not redrawing things that you already drew once. It's a waste of time. Let's coordinate better, let's move better so that we can get that value coming out of here, which leads to things like material optimization. Again, from actual things that we've done with various clients is being able to take a model from Revit and turn it into something that goes into automatic takeoffs, pipe run details, figuring out how do things need to get bent, get some automatic bends pulled through so we can get to prefab or pre-assembly, translate what's in the model to the things that you've got in stock. So there's all sorts of things that are possible, but again, you've got to share. That's a key important part of this. You've got to be able to model reasonably accurately. I'm not going to say that you need to model every half-inch domestic hot-cold water pipe everywhere inside a building. Certainly not for the vast majority of projects that are out there, but there may be somewhere it does matter. But you take the parts that matter, apply them to that specific building and what its requirements are, and there's amazing, wonderful things that can happen coming from there. Another reality, so we've been dealing with a lot of realities here that are more design, engineering, construction related. And as I'm going through it, hopefully you're picking off the ones that matter more to you or that you want to matter more to you going forward. But from an owner side, we've been doing a survey for a number of years now, and we'll be continuing it going forward. But one of the pieces of that survey is talking to building owners and saying, what do you want, Mr. and Mrs. Owner, out of BIM? And here are the types of results we got. The whole idea of the last one, Kobe IFC-based data, was a new response or a new option we gave for response in our 2017 survey. So that didn't have anything of previous years to compare to. But it's pretty consistent. There's a little bit of adjustment year to year, but it's pretty consistent. Space and asset information is really important. Maintenance schedules are really important. I'll argue that doesn't really belong or become part of the BIM process. That's more of a facility management software integration piece. I guess you could say it's part of the BIM process, but it's not something that, we'll say, an architect or an engineer is going to input into the system, the maintenance schedules. It doesn't really belong in, we'll say, Revit. It belongs in your FM solution. But space and asset information is really, really high on their list of stuff. And it just so happens that space and asset information is some of the easiest stuff to get out of Revit. You think about it. You go through and you create a building, you place a bunch of rooms. Congratulations, you now have space, area information. Take those rooms, give them a department name, and all of a sudden now you've not only got rooms, net or gross square footage, but now you have departmental area allocations. Extend from there and use area objects if you like, and you can get even more detail, but it's just a nice, easy byproduct of what is BIM. Asset information, what in the Revit world, what we call component families, also fits into there. Are you caring about your major rooftop units? Well, as we're going through the modeling process, maybe it's a generic piece of information through the initial design and engineering, but by the time, if we go through it all and we share information with each other, we go through it all and the final as-builts are coming from the GC, whomever's responsible for it. We now have specific information about the rooftop unit assets that are sitting there inside your building model that can be shared, there's the word again, with facility management systems. So it's all these things that are there, and if this is the easy stuff for Revit, why not work with, if you're on the design or construction side, why not work with the owners to start getting that to them? Strengthen that relationship, build value into the services that you're providing, additional value into the services you're providing, but also make sure you constrain it a little bit, that whole trust but verify, share but verify, what information really matters. And we'll work through that. Let's find that and make it a more cohesive team. Because to the owner, it's a little bit of a different world. We've seen this type of diagram, I don't know how many times, and I've certainly shown it over many, many years. It's the whole idea of the BIM is the center of the world, and we design and renovate buildings throughout their entire life cycle, design, build, operate. And it's just BIM is in the middle of all this stuff. Well, from an owner side, it's not BIM, it's data. BIM is a source of data, not the source of data. So let's work with other sources of data that they're grabbing. So they're getting information that's coming from sensors and the Internet of Things that's out there and feeding their building, or they're pulling it from whatever sort of a PeopleSoft databases of where are people moving within a building or whatever it might happen to be. Let's get these things to talk with each other and integrate, because in the end, we're trying to get past these gaps. And we've seen this diagram before. It's still a reality. There's value in effectively sharing information with each other. And the key word here is probably that effective part. Is as we're going through design into, cost, procurement, construction, operations, if we're not effectively sharing, we lose stuff in there. Now, granted, not everybody necessarily gains from all these things. If you're on the left side of that transition, what do you gain by helping somebody else go forward further? Well, this might be that piece of we're saying, let's make the world a better place by doing things. Let's do what's right instead of just sending things off wherever, or let's do this and get value out of this by building better business relationships, which will end up helping the business over the long haul. There's all sorts of things we can go through to justify why it's right and good to share better. And if we're sharing better, it's more often these days as things in BIM continue to grow and grow. This is a slide about Autodesk BIM 360, but the key part of this is the common data repository. Doesn't matter where you're at, what softwares or cloud solutions you're using or whatever else, effective sharing over the life of a project in BIM is going to involve a common data repository. Yeah, I'll promote this one. This is the one we work with, of course. But let's find that place where I can control who has access to what data and when. And as the manager of a project, no matter what or who or what role I'm in, but let's all be retrieving data from the same place so that if I need information from the MEP system, or the structural system, or something in cost estimation, or a spreadsheet about whatever, or. It doesn't matter what, it's all sitting there. I upload my Revit file and I can start looking at things in that common data repository. I open from there, sync to central to there. But it's a place where everybody can be working off of one common data source about the project. We have to share, we have to trust, we certainly still verify. If the cloud's not good for you, blatant plug through here, there's an IMAGINiT solution that can help out with parts of this. It's really Revit-centric at this time, but the whole idea of our Clarity software with the security module working with Autodesk Revit Server to apply sharing in a single data repository for Revit files that is not cloud-oriented. So all these things are there, and it's good and it's great, but we've got to share and verify and ask some questions about it. If we're looking at questions, 3 different things specific. There was, tens and hundreds of different possibilities, but 3 in particular. If we're looking at BIM for facilities management, there's value. BIM for quantification, BIM for clash detection. Those are 3 different types of things that we can get, and they're established. They're real benefits that we get out of BIM. You might be receiving some of those benefits now or working to achieve some of those benefits, but those are 3 that are practical reality benefits today. And they all happen at different stages of design. So facilities, post-occupancy by the owner. If we're looking at what we had for quantification, designers, architects, engineers, contractors. Clash detection, that's both during design and during pre-construction. All those different types. So it doesn't matter who you are, there's different stages where it'll apply and who gets benefit from that. But if we're going for all this, we're saying, yes, we want to get benefit for facilities management, for quantification, for whatever, then we have to ask some different questions depending on where you're at. Who's populating the data for facilities management? Is it the architect? Is it the engineer? Is it the contractor, the subcontractor? Is it the owner? All those different possibilities exist. Which is right for you? If we're looking at doing quantification, what can reliably be counted? I had mentioned light fixtures or toilets or you name it. Is there any double counting within your building models? If we're looking at clash detection, how accurately were things modeled up? When somebody changed from equipment X to equipment Y because it was value engineered, or we found a fire sale on a certain rooftop unit and got it cheaper, but the connection points are a little bit different. Is it accurate enough? Does it matter? Do we need to remodel any of the piping or services to that rooftop unit? How is it working? These are the types of questions we've got to be able to ask ourselves, because the biggest and best tool that we've got for all these things to be able to pull value from BIM ends up being, in the end, you. I have no idea if this one's true or not. I didn't go through the full back checking to make sure that Einstein really said this, but I liked it, so I used it. Logic is one thing, and it's really, really important. But imagination is what's going to get us to that next step, because we've got to be thinking about all these different values that aren't our reality today. And so it's your mind that comes in and is the key to all of these different tools. It doesn't matter if you're using Revit, M360, anything, advanced steel, robot structural analysis. The list goes on and on and on and on. Any of those tools don't matter for squat if you're not there with them. You're not really pushing it along the way. You're not using and engaging with your imagination of what could be possible. Because if you can imagine what's possible or what you would like to be possible, in the end, it's just time and money that gets us between what you can think of and where reality is. And maybe it's too much time, maybe it's too much money, maybe it's a whole lot cheaper, so to speak, than you thought it was going to be. But your brain, your imagination is the most important tool. After that, it's planning on how do we get from where you are now to where you want to be, where your imagination takes you, where software capabilities are now, where they could be later, where they might be just with a custom Dynamo script. And that's a matter of generating that framework to be able to get there. BIM execution plans, guidelines, collaborative requirements of how are we sharing things together. The idea of having these, you probably have some. If not, get in touch. We can certainly help you with any of these things, but we've got to identify what's that vision, what's that goal, the idea and the value that you want to get for yourself, for your clients, for the world around you. But let's figure out what these things need to be so we can map out that road to get you there. If you've got this idea of this is the framework for what we've got, make sure you're taking into consideration not just your needs, but your team's requirements, the building or the project requirements, which may go to somebody else's BIM standard. You know, I've got Penn State listed there, could just as easily be, you know, owner X's BIM standards. You know what you want to get out of that BIM. Know what other people want to get out of BIM. How are you going to measure if it's successful or not? Get all of these things. Get the bigger picture. Take off our blinders where we can. I know I've got mine, but I'll constantly be reaching out to people around me of, you know, what do you think? What about this? What about that? Because there's things that I just won't see because, you know, my perspective on life. And that's fine. And I'd hope that they ask me the same, and then we start getting things back and forth. And part of that is really where IMAGINiT can help fit in. There's hundreds and dozens of different things that we've got through here that are places where we could help out with your business. You know, let us be that missing piece of the puzzle. Whatever it needs to be for you to be a more effective, efficient business so that you can focus on the things that matter to you. So you can get to that next level of what's possible inside your realization of the value of BIM. So whether it's just doing a health check for your model to understand where is it now and how can it be better going forward. There's something with, you know, you need some help with BIM or CAD management because your existing BIM or CAD manager is just overwhelmed. It's crazy, it's busy, it's whatever. But, you know, reviewing your existing processes, see what's that next possible thing. Software development, because you know what it is and you know there's not a solution for it out there, but this is a $1 million problem, and we can help solve it for you for less than $1 million, presumably. But where's that space where we can help out? It's just a matter of let's take that imagination. Let's bounce ideas off of each other, figure out what's right, and then leverage IMAGINiT to help achieve those things, to get the value out of BIM, whether you're in architecture, engineering, construction, facilities management, or you're in one of those groups and you want to work better with one of the other groups. That's where we're at for you. So I'll say, hey, thank you very much for the time here. Hopefully the information that we've talked about, the things that we've gone through here, while it may be some level of a back to basics for some, there's, you know, reinvigoration of what's possible inside this whole world of BIM and what it can do for you, what it can do for your company, and how we can make your business, your colleagues, everything that's in this world a little bit of a better place. Thanks.
One moment while I end today's recording.